Hi, this is Valley View, and this week your hosts are Ken Adams and Kim Braj, and our guest is Gregg Moreland, and he's here to talk a little bit about the recent Supreme Court decisions on same-sex marriage, as well as what's in store for Oregon on this subject. So welcome to the show, Gregg.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here today.
Sure. Today's a special day, isn't it?
It is a special day, and you're going to start a new campaign here in Oregon?
Right. In Oregon, we have a coalition of 200 organizations have come together, and this is national organizations plus local, churches and other organizations throughout the state of Oregon, called Oregon United for Marriage. And Oregon United for Marriage is working to overturn Measure 36 and put in its place a constitutional amendment that will allow the freedom to marry for all loving and committed couples in the state of Oregon.
That's
well,
awesome.
and this has been brought about partially through the recent Supreme Court decisions that were handed down this last session.
Well, actually, Oregon's been working on this. Basic Rights Oregon started working on this a couple years ago, and they started doing some work throughout the state to help change minds and change hearts and minds throughout the state of Oregon. And so they, regardless of what the Supreme Court had said or the timing of the Supreme Court, this would have gone forward in Oregon.
Okay.
That's interesting.
And it's kind of difficult going over the Constitution, right?
Right.
And so you're going to have solid numbers to do this.
Right. Basic Rights Oregon looked originally at doing this at the last presidential election and decided that the numbers weren't quite solid enough with support. Now the support in Oregon is, I don't know exact numbers, but it's over 50%. And the trend has been rising, nationwide since the victories we had on the ballot last year. Since those victories, the support has been rising tremendously around the country.
Plus, there's been several states, mainly in New England, and I believe Iowa and some other places, that have instituted same-sex marriage, and the world has not come to an end.
Right.
Right.
But I mean, that was quite a, talking point among religious types, that they were talking about the fact, well, this is the end of civilization or something like that.
Well, they said it was the end of civilization. Then they said, well, you've never won at the ballot because you've always lost at the ballot. Well, we've now won at the ballot. So Oregon is now taking the next step. No other state has reversed their constitutional amendment, and Oregon will be the first state to do that.
Right, and you said several states issued those constitutional amendments back in 2004 or something?
Yes, 2004,
Yeah.
as part of this whole thing that was basically generated from Karl Rove to get Bush reelected.
Wow.
Well, that's that divisive type
Right.
of issues,
Divide and
wedge
conquer.
issues. It's kind of interesting, too, because I think most viewers know that I lived in California for quite some period of time. And the Republican Party in the early 90s started doing that with, Spanish language only. And what they did was they alienated a whole group of citizens and have not been a majority party since. And I think that these divisive issues come with a price.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the Republican Party has been paying that price for quite some time. You'd hope that they would kind of wise up at some point. But do you see any indications that the Republican Party, not Republican Party members, but the people that kind of run the party have caught on to this?
Oh, we see some signs of there are some Republicans that have been showing that they are supportive of marriage equality and also supportive of other protections for LGBT. We've seen right now in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate, they finally are moving the Employment Non-Discrimination Act through the Senate.
Employment non-discrimination?
Right.
I thought that was handled a long time ago.
We have protections here in Oregon. We have protections in 29 states.
But not federally?
But not, there are all the other states that are not protected. And so Senator Merkley is the chief sponsor in the Senate. So he has been really pushing very, very hard to get the Employment Non-Discrimination Act passed.
Wow. Yeah, that seems like that was all yesterday's stuff. I
Well,
thought that was resolved.
You would think, but actually in my work lifetime, one of my bosses was fired because he was gay.
Mm-hmm.
And last time
Yeah.
I saw him, he was going to make coffee, you know,
Right.
and you know, and that, I mean, it's kind of interesting because, you know, during my working life, I've seen so much that now people don't even know about. We used to have 2 Christmas parties, one for the men, one for the women.
Right.
Oh my gosh, we used to smoke in the office.
Well, that's.
That was
I
another weird one.
usually worked in computer rooms, so that was kind of verboten even way
Okay.
back when.
But one of the things that, you know, both with, you know, the employment protections, the workplace protections, and also with the states that have the freedom to marry, one of the things that the Supreme Court ruling, especially with Defense of Marriage Act, brought about is really showing that we have 2 Americas. We have the America where we have the workplace protections and we have either freedom to marry or a clear pathway. It's going to be a lot of work, but a clear pathway to get to the freedom to marry. And then the states that have no protections and no pathway for the freedom to marry. So that's what, you know, because we live in such a great place, we don't see that.
Well, do those states have anything in common? Is it the Bible Belt, or is it?
A good number of them are in the South,
Uh-huh.
the southern states, the Midwest and southern states.
The West Coast and the East Coast don't have as much
Well,
of an issue with it?
Well,
They
you have
do?
to remember that Prop 8, which was one of the Supreme Court decisions that they decided to let a lower court decision stand, was California. And they passed the thing saying that you couldn't have same-sex marriage. And this was
In
just,
California?
yeah,
Wow.
this was
Right.
fairly recently.
Well, California had originally started granting marriage licenses,
Right.
and there were a number of couples who were married. And then Prop 8 came to overturn that, and Prop 8 passed in 2008. And so it's been through the courts, through the circuit court, that said, no, this is wrong, this is discrimination, this violates these basic principles. And the state of California didn't want to challenge that. They said, yes, we agree with you. But other parties decided to challenge that and decided to take it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court basically said, sorry, you don't have any standing here in court. That, you know, you can't challenge this ruling. And so we're going, basically it put it back to what the Ninth Circuit Court said.
So no Proposition 8.
Right, so now California is granting marriage licenses again.
Although
That's
recently,
interesting.
the same group tried to make it so that the local county clerks wouldn't give out marriage licenses.
Right, they challenged, they've challenged a couple times since the Supreme Court ruling, and the state Supreme Court has struck that down each time, that basically saying, well, that only applied in the 2 counties where the 2 couples resided, and no other counties in the state. And so they've tried to narrow it, but the state Supreme Court said, no, this applied to the entire state.
Right. I mean, the counties are challenging the Supreme Court.
Well,
That's
no,
great.
it was this group.
That group, and there are a couple of county clerks that are part of that group. So a couple county clerks were saying, we agree, we're not going to grant marriage licenses for same-sex couples.
And
That's sort of like the marijuana rule in Oregon, where physicians won't prescribe it, even though it's supposed to be legal. The physicians have pressure not to prescribe
Right.
it.
So,
that's
so
how
anyway,
laws
so
go sometimes.
because of the Supreme Court, California now can grant marriage licenses for same-sex couples, and also because of the ruling on Defense of Marriage Act, California, Washington, all the other states that have freedom to marry, they have access to the federal benefits and
That's-
survivor
Yeah,
benefits.
that's the important part.
And federal employees now are also protected, regardless of where they at. So they can, their spouse can be, you know, receive the same benefits other federal employees get. People in the military now, if they're married in a state that allows marriage and then they're transferred to another state, they still have those benefits because the federal government protects those benefits.
And that is kind of an important thing because it's kind of like this 2-tiered system that we've been
Right.
trying to run, and it's not being equal to all couples. And
Right.
that is a major issue. But, and you were talking too about employment discrimination, but there's other kinds of discrimination that are going on around this issue. It's not just marriage, and it's not just work. It's also about things like when you're trying to rent a
Right,
home.
right. Protections in housing, and Oregon is one state that's really good about having the housing protection and the employment and the workplace protections. But not every state has the housing piece of that, even if they have the employment protections.
Well, how
So-
would they ever even know? I mean, if two men want to rent an apartment, people do that all the time, or two women, or
Oh,
whatever.
there are ways. There are ways of finding out,
That's amazing.
and
How could you ever discriminate against how many, what same-sex adults can be in an apartment?
Well,
My
I would
niece
also
lives
think
with
that if they
3 women.
suspect, then they're going to say no. Whether they have any evidence to prove that.
But just
that or not.
regular rental rules say that you can't discriminate.
well,
Well-
that you're talking about in Oregon, but there are some states where they have tried to put in laws that almost, ban same-sex roommates.
That's
It's they haven't gone quite that
We
far,
would-
but they've
We would
gotten
hope
close.
that our teenagers wouldn't have opposite-sex roommates. That's what we were promoting before.
So there
but
there have
that's
been
weird.
some interesting plays on that.
I bet. They're getting all tied up in their own mess, it sounds like.
Yes.
That's not very good.
You could talk a little bit about the actual effect of the Supreme Court decisions. How does that change things, and what is it going to mean going forward?
Well, going forward, it basically, on one place is we have a lot more court challenges now that have come up in the last month. Ohio, Pennsylvania, there's several other states that they've brought things to the courts, and the lower courts are already starting to say, yes, what the Supreme Court said means that our state needs to grant the freedom to marry. And so we might see some movement in places like Ohio. We might see some movement in Pennsylvania because of what the courts are saying.
So once the courts say something like that, does it also require a law change, or can the court's ruling make
The
the
court
change?
ruling, depends on the court ruling, and I'm not really a legal person, so I can't really say too much. But generally, court ruling will, either overturn a law or will refer a law back to the state legislature or something like that. So there could be lots of different paths that they could take for that.
And DOMA was a federal law that was
Right.
passed by Congress. And one of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong, but DOMA said that if you lived in a state that didn't have same-sex marriage, you didn't have to recognize a marriage from a state that did.
Right, and that is still in
That's still
force,
in effect.
That part. The only part, the different parts of DOMA, and the part that basically said the federal government doesn't have to recognize that marriage either, is what was struck down.
Yeah. 'Cause
So
Okay.
the part that says that Oregon doesn't have to recognize a marriage in Washington is still there. But the part that said the federal government has to recognize that marriage in Washington, that's what was struck down.
even if they're in Oregon now or whatever, they'll recognize it. Right?
Yeah.
Anywhere.
So so like if a couple was married in Washington and moved here to Oregon, and like one of the issues that comes up is like during healthcare about visiting and so on. The hospital could deny the partner to.
Well, technically, in Oregon, they can't, but they would have to sign up as domestic partners,
Okay.
in Oregon if they moved here, so that then they can use those domestic partner, and hopefully the hospital would recognize that, which that's one of the reasons why we need to change the law in Oregon, is because sometimes that domestic partner relationship doesn't quite work.
It's a second tier kind of right, and it doesn't give you full rights. It's like when I've been married for a long time, and like when we've moved to a different state and like that, it's always been recognized. I mean, I hate to think of going through all this rigmarole just to try to say get health care for my spouse,
Right.
and like that.
Right, and the way it has worked in a lot of companies that do offer spousal benefits or same-sex spousal benefits for domestic partners, some companies still have a third tier of benefits for your partner but some of them are, some of the bigger corporations have moved into understanding that civil union or that domestic partnership is the same thing, at least for their benefit administration.
Right. Is there some benefit to society for having domestic partnerships and these type of things, or just in general for people being committed to each other?
Well, the family structure is important, and everyone agrees that
Right.
having a strong foundation, family foundation, is important. And so, it's difficult with that domestic partner situation for that child. That child says, yeah, my domestic partner parent, it's like, what do you call it? Instead of my mom, or
Yeah.
they're domestic partnered,
Well,
they're
the
married.
kids are already getting used to that
Yeah.
with all the step inside. And
Right, but it's easier
whatever.
to say my parents are married and then
Yeah.
they're domestic partnered.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see that. Yes, that's what you're talking about. I mean, they could say my dad and my other dad and stuff like
Right,
that.
and then there's also, if I had a partner and I went into a bank to get a joint loan, well, this is my partner. Well, is this your business partner? Or is this your,
Domestic.
and there's always that question that comes up. Many couples have had that kind of experience as well.
Does it matter when you're getting a loan?
It can.
A business loan is different than a
A personal loan.
personal loan
Right.
that you use your spouse as,
Yeah.
part of.
Keep
Right.
combine the income and everything. Yeah.
Right.
Well, not only that, but like if you're getting a house or a car
Mhm.
or something like that, you want to have both your names on there.
Right.
So,
Right.
it makes a difference. So you feel like there's building support, not just here in Oregon, but nationwide.
Right. There's right now the latest Washington Post ABC poll that I've seen was in March, and there's 58% of Americans support same-sex marriage,
Oh, that's
and
good news.
so that is nationwide, and it's huge. It's been going up dramatically, over the last 2 years, but especially since the November elections, it's been going up a lot.
Yeah, because I think people are consciously thinking about it now instead of just having a gut reaction. They're thinking about what does this mean and why is it okay?
Well, they
and-
also, the president says, this is what's right. And when you hear the president say, this is what's right, then you want to think about it and say, why?
Yeah. Why is it right and what?
And the president that signed DOMA is now saying that he regretted it.
Right.
So that's another
Right, that was
point.
Clinton that signed it, so.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And was the Defense of Marriage Act against marriage?
It
Or-
was, yes, it was basically put in place out of fear that Hawaii was going to grant same-sex marriage. And that hasn't happened yet in Hawaii. They're still working on that, and that might happen
Right.
in the next year. But still, it was to say,
that
oh,
was
no.
the One Man, One Woman Defense of Marriage Act.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I
And,
see.
and that was to try to make it so that if Hawaii did say it was okay, the other states didn't have to recognize it. And,
brother.
Exactly. And saying,
Very reactionary.
right, saying the other states won't recognize it and the federal government won't recognize it either. Yeah, so you can do what you want as a state, but we're not going to recognize it. And
Wow.
so, now we can say the Supreme Court said, that's wrong. That's discrimination.
That's discrimination. That's right. I mean, oh, wow. Do you have, like you said, you have a grassroots movement. What are the different types of organizations that are supporting you?
Well, at the very top end of the campaign, it was Basic Rights Oregon, Human Rights Campaign, Freedom to Marry, National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. There's a couple other organizations that are national organizations that
How
are.
about the League of Women Voters? Is that
They're probably in there. I don't know all the
Okay,
200
okay.
organizations because there's a lot of
But there's
churches
different
and a lot
types
of
of-
Well,
community
for example, what
organizations.
churches are supporting this? Because that to me was like a big issue in the California.
Right. Well, there's the Community of Welcoming Congregations in Oregon is a coalition of welcoming congregations that welcome everybody.
right?
But one of the things that we have learned, partially from California, but also learned on the positive side from Minnesota and Washington and Maryland is if you work in the faith community on these ballot campaigns, that's where you're going to make your gains. And that's where you're going to win the campaigns, is to work through the faith community.
Because there are a lot of people that belong to them.
Right. Well, and a lot of people in faith community, they understand things like the Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule says treat others as you would want to be treated.
Right, yeah.
And so having those discussions with the average person who attends a church really makes a difference.
Yeah, because then they think it through and they see that it does
Right.
fit with their beliefs.
Right. So, you know, with this campaign here in Oregon, Oregon United for Marriage, there is a faith director hired for the campaign who will be working statewide with faith groups to help, you know, help make progress on that.
Get the petitions out there and,
Well, and beyond the petitions, but because there's the petition part, which I will talk about in a minute, but then there's also a lot of persuasion conversations to
answering questions. And,
and help people understand
Understand,
that
right.
this is common sense.
Right.
You know, having a committed couple that loves each other, that's
It's a
what
strength for the
everybody,
nation.
you know, you ask any married couple, why are you married? We're married because we love each other, we're committed to each other. And same-sex couples want the same thing. They want to be
Right.
committed. They want to make an announcement on that same level to say, yes, I support this person. I'm going to support this person for the rest of my life. They're going to support me for the rest of
Right,
of
we're
their
a
life.
pair, yeah, that's right.
And to be able to make that statement is a huge statement in society. So that's a huge piece of having those conversations with the voters in Oregon so that when we get beyond the petition, we can actually certify that it's going to be on the ballot. We've continued that work that Basic Rights started a couple years ago of having those conversations to change the hearts and minds of the voters. But with the petitions, right now we have to get 116,000 signatures to qualify for the ballot. February 14th, there was an initial launch statewide, 14 cities around the state on February 14th, to get 2,000 signatures because we needed an initial submission to the Secretary of State to say, yes, we have a valid ballot, and it requires
2,000 to
2,000
start with?
signatures.
Okay.
Yes. And so we got that approved. There were some challenges from the opposition, but finally, as of today, they can say, yes, here is what, yes, we can now begin getting the petitions, getting the signatures, so we can begin the work to get the 116,000 signatures statewide by July of next year.
Okay. Yeah,
So
here.
there's, right now, this weekend, July 26th, July 27th, July 28th, there's a really big push statewide and locations around the state where people can go get trained on how to gather signatures and go out and begin. They have a goal of 10,000 signatures in 10 days
Okay. Wow.
around the state. Here in
Good
Salem,
start.
here in Salem, they're going to be doing at Marion County Democrat's office Friday, Saturday, and Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. to 12 to noon.
We have to go by their office.
Go by the office, you get the training, get the petition
I see,
packet.
Become a petitioner. Okay.
There is also the option, people, if they don't want to become a petitioner, they can go there and
To
Sign a
sign.
petition.
and
yeah.
people like me will be there to help to say here. So that's right now what the current push is to get the signatures around the state.
And why the 10,000 in this first period? Is there some logic?
10,000 in 10 days, that's just sounds really good. That basically shows that you have a really strong campaign. You know, it's just a way to say, yeah, we're committed to doing this, instead of just saying, yeah, here's some petitions, just do it.
Right.
And
the people that really wanted or were waiting for this and wanted to do it are going to come forward right away.
Right.
And seek it out, probably.
And you get 5,000, 6,000 signatures, maybe if you're lucky. But if you basically set out and say, we have 1,100 people who are committed, and we're still looking for more who want to do it as well. 1,100 people who are committed around the state to get
The 10,000 now.
get 25 signatures a person.
Wow.
So, so that is what the current short-term goal is, and it's really important to have these short-term goals because that
keeps you on target for the
something-
116,000.
right. That's something that's tangible. 10,000
benchmarks,
doesn't
yeah.
seem that difficult, and so let's do that, and then they'll have other goals as well.
And it's important too that they make sure that they're valid signatures. And,
Right.
And because I know that usually the Secretary of State will go through each of those pages. Usually there's 10 or 20 signatures on there, and they don't count each and every one. What they
audit
do
them.
is they take a sample out of the ones you've turned in and then multiply it out.
Right.
And so I just, because I've done petition things before, and I know it's real important to make sure that you get good, valid signatures.
Right. It's valid Oregon voters over the age of 18. So even if someone, in Oregon, you can get your voter registration when you're 17, knowing that, you'll be 18 next time you can vote. Those people don't count because basically the signatures are
be
based on
18.
can you vote today or not.
I see. Okay.
And so valid Oregon voters, current registration over the age of 18.
Yep. Okay. That's good. Well, I hope you get a lot of them.
Yeah.
I'll sign it. I'll be right there.
We'll be down to sign.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll be there Saturday morning.
Okay.
Good.
What time do they open again?
10 a.m.
10. Oh, okay. I think I have a previous engagement Saturday, unfortunately. So anyway, I want to thank all our viewers for watching Valley View this week, and thank Gregg Moreland for coming in and talking about this subject. And come back.
We'll have to have him back before the year's up and see
Right,
how it's
definitely.
going.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that would be
We'll have
cool.
him come back and do an update, and you come back to Valley View next week. Thank you.